Well, it has it has been something of a jolt. No matter how much a person attempts to ready themselves for an event such as this, it is it is remains a terrible blow, and we are all struggling to process that, and it is deeply, deeply sorrowful. Prince Edward, the most introverted figure within the monarchy, has just stunned everybody, and the whole of Britain is staggering. Throughout a poignant conversation, Edward revealed years of private battles that have sculpted his existence behind palace fortifications. For the initial time, he talked regarding the profound injuries inflicted by persistent parallels drawn to his brother, disclosing the toll those strains took on his youth and maturity. The query remains, what compelled him to talk out at this moment, and how did the monarchy respond to his brave candor? Stay with us as we transport you into the instances that altered everything for Prince Edward. Prince Edward's predicament involves the fact that the royal household possesses a few rebels, but Prince Edward has never been among them. The public frequently referred to him as the most withdrawn individual in the British monarchy. Yet when he resolved to issue a condemning disclosure, it hit so many individuals like an icy bucket of water. It was abrupt and nearly surreal to observe the prince who had constructed a fame for serenity for over 60 years. For the initial time, he permitted the globe to witness how significantly the prior few years had exhausted him. It was not a theatrical confession, it was plain and tender, and that rendered it even more potent. Audiences subsequently remarked that they felt as though they were observing a man emerge from his own obscurity. The communal response to Prince Edward's admission was immediate. Individuals who had scarcely given heed to him started to perceive the gloom that had forever lurked beneath his grin, and what they discovered astonished everyone. Continue viewing to discover what people unearthed when they retrieved vintage recordings of Edward at state functions, family reunions and philanthropic tours. They contrasted the Edward they used to observe with the man talking presently. There was a fresh grief in his gaze, and it caused many to comprehend how unseen he had been for the majority of his existence. His function had consistently been hushed and auxiliary. Other people were permitted their tempests, but he was required to remain composed. Witnessing the formerly solid man shake even slightly elicited compassion from the entire population. What could possibly be amiss with the prince? Edward was the last-born, the one who was seldom situated at the focal point of anything. He attended Gordon Town just like his siblings before him, and he subsequently read history at Cambridge. However, the populace seldom linked him with any significant emergency of the monarchy. He was the reliable figure who did not ignite controversies, did not draw banner headlines, and did not require notice. Certain analysts portrayed him as the household's silent motor, always functioning, always there.
The earth had witnessed louder characters in the royal residence. It is evident now that something had been accumulating within him. Even though he kept on fulfilling his obligations with the identical vigor as normal, something in his stance had shifted. According to informants near to Edward, he has been anxious regarding Queen Elizabeth II. He had matured observing her endure the gale of sovereignty. Edward was the nearest among her offspring. The Queen maintained more than 15,000 formal appointments during her rule, and her schedule persisted well into her 90s. Edward had attempted to pursue that model. He viewed her steadiness as an individual power. The more he desired to respect her by existing with the equivalent resolve, the more her might became a burden that pushed down on his own back. Edward had vowed to himself that he would keep the family united in whatever minor fashion he could following her demise. It was a pledge taken silently on the date she passed away, the identical date the United Kingdom registered more than 10 days of grief, and nearly 250,000 people waited in line to view her lying in state. He desired to equal her tranquility and perception of obligation, yet every month following her passing made him sense the price of this oath. The duty started to sink into his marrow. He would rise with the sensation that something valuable was sliding away, and he did not understand how to halt it. But that was not everything. The solidarity that the Queen had preserved for decades started to vanish rapidly following her death. It all commenced minimally, with fewer family portraits, fewer shared showings in public, and less communication across the various sectors of the kinship. Individuals surrounding the castle corroborated that the affection that used to exist in the chamber when she entered was no longer present. Without her, every dispute seemed larger, and every gap expanded a little further. Edward observed the strain increase between Charles, Edward, William, and Harry. What had formerly been controllable arguments became more severe. The conversations regarding the destiny of the crown generated fresh points of stress. The rupture between William and Harry still echoed around the globe, with polls indicating that the British population no longer believes in the brothers' connection. Another issue was Edward's position. It not only impacted the public reputation of the clan, but also the sentimental bonds within it. Charles possessed his own conflicts as he attempted to guide the establishment during a period of fewer active royals and a louder request for openness. Each man confronted a tempest of his own, and each tempest contributed to the rigid vibe that Edward navigated every day. Edward absorbed all of this silently. He did not quarrel regarding anything, and he did not pick factions. He merely soaked it up, and the heaviness expanded within him. There were more shut doorways, more precisely calculated entrances, and more regulated chats in the castle. The location that previously seemed like a residence started to seem like a gallery, where everybody attempted not to disrupt the quiet. The sentimental separation became the portion he wrestled with the most. It was not a public emergency, it was the private mood that sliced deepest. He walked through halls where the recollection of mirth still resided, yet the current atmosphere felt rigid. He would gaze at paintings of the Queen and sense both solace and stress. He would ponder her serenity, her reliability, her capacity to unite people, and he would question why he could not reproduce the identical sensation. That silent query became the kernel of his gradual breaking point. The harder he attempted, the nearer he floated toward the brink of his endurance. This was not a volatile breakdown. It was a gradual interior alteration. But what numerous people did not perceive is that Edward's present predicament is not a solitary occurrence. Let us stroll down memory lane, back to his youth, where it all commenced. Remain with us, because this is merely the start. Prince Edward's youth and rearing. During his initial years, Prince Edward was the hushed kid of the home. Charles was the heir whom everyone observed. Anne possessed assurance that propelled her through any chamber. Edward garnered notice without even attempting. Edward recognized very early that he was distinct. He did not battle for territory. He chose to lean back, hear, and observe the earth rotate around him. People occasionally confused that for timidity, but it was truly a perceptiveness he never learned to conceal. He perceived things other kids disregarded, such as the way a person adjusted when they felt ill at ease, the way the employees looked exhausted after lengthy days, the way his mother bore her diadem with a poise that concealed the tension beneath. He gave heed to tempers and pauses. He recalled tiny specifics that nobody anticipated him to spot. These customs molded who he would turn into and silently shoved him further into an existence of scrutiny. His proximity to the Queen developed organically from that. She comprehended that he was not constructed like the rest. He frequently felt as if she could perceive the loud turmoil inside him, even when he uttered nothing. He discovered solace in her company. When life in the castle felt too burdened with requirement, he would remain close to her because she rendered the environment superior. He confessed during a discussion that Queen Elizabeth once stated to him that she realized he viewed the world uniquely. She intended it as support, but even as a youngster, he felt that this type of sight could feel like both a gift and a hex. As he matured, the issue of where he belonged in the royal sequence became tougher to disregard. The ranking in the household was defined and open. Charles was the prospective monarch. Anne had already established a robust persona. Edward pulled much of the focus, both inside and outside the estate. He desired to discover his route, something that corresponded to the way he viewed existence. But delineating that trail was more arduous than most folks realized. Those battles were not theatrical, they were tiny and persistent. He attempted entering the Royal Marines in his early 20s, but departed instruction after 4 months. Detractors did not restrain themselves. Publications characterized him as wanting in endurance. If you consider that startling, then wait until you listen to his subsequent action. A few years following the Marine episode, he moved into television creation with Ardent, and the firm became the topic of jests in numerous British tabloids. Some noted that his shows seldom attracted heavy viewership and that his firm once recorded near Prince William at college, contrary to advice from the palace. The press exaggerated every error because of who he was. Each banner chipped away at his self-assurance. He attempted to proceed past it, but those instances settled quietly within him and affected how he evaluated himself. Then came Sophie.
When he encountered her, his existence shifted in a manner he never anticipated. She comprehended his type of tenderness. She supplied him with something he had never possessed in consistent quantity, which was emotional security. She did not handle him like a background character. She handled him like a man who merited space. In 1999, their nuptials were viewed by more than 200 million people. Yet he did not feel swamped that day because she was there alongside him. Having her signified he finally possessed a person who viewed him plainly and embraced him in a way the public never did. With Sophie, he discovered equilibrium. She made it feasible for him to construct an existence that permitted him to be the variant of himself he genuinely enjoyed. They labored together on philanthropies. They backed missions without global noise and created significant adjustments. People observed how he loosened up around her. His brothers and sister noticed it as well. It was as though the tender portions of him finally had room to respire. Still, the parallels never ceased. Charles possessed the diadem and continued her obligation with more than 500 appointments in several years. Edward stayed the focus of public examination long before the most grave scandals commenced. Edward sat quietly alongside all of it, performing his labor and wishing the earth would one day view him as more than the redundant brother in the shade. The self-doubt did not govern his life, but it appeared in moments when lenses were too near or when reviewers contrasted the brothers once more. He understood how he was regarded. He hoped people comprehended that the quieter members of the clan had their distinct obligations too. Then something occurred that left him devastated. It was the passing of Queen Elizabeth. According to palace informants, the Queen's demise reopened every ancient insecurity at once. She had been the single person who grasped his softness, not as frailty, but as a segment of his character.
Losing her felt like losing the sole anchor that had kept him balanced since youth. The burial was viewed by more than 4 billion people around the globe, and for Edward, it was simply overpowering. He stood alongside his mourning siblings, but his sorrow was regarding his identity as much as his affection for her. He sensed the lack of her spirit more profoundly than he anticipated. Without her, the castle felt distinct, and he felt exposed. After her passing, something he had interred for years started shoving its way to the top again. The emotional price of existence inside the crown, the one he had learned to ingest since childhood, returned. But this time, he could no longer shove it away. It was not rage, it was not dread, it was compression. And the compression got to its boiling point during a recent gathering of the royal household. What we are about to disclose will alter everything you thought you understood about Edward, so stay with us. Prince Edward's showdown with King Charles occurred recently when King Charles convened a gathering of the royal kin. There was no ritual, no noise, just a conference in a chamber. The chamber carried a slight scent of varnished timber and worn rugs, the sort of odor that always made Edward think of endless hours walking hallways in his youth, watching and pondering silently. The risks were elevated as public worry had been increasing, and the royal clan needed to seem joined.
Yet the vibe was replete with irritations, and Edward could feel it all landing on him almost before the session even commenced. When King Charles finally initiated the session, he concentrated on keeping the family parallel and the populace comforted. He talked regarding solidarity, regarding the significance of every deed being calculated and drilled, regarding defending against any error that might seep into public sight. When it was William's turn to speak, he reiterated almost everything his father had stated. Everything was regarding facades, regarding evading the slightest clue of fragility. Edward listened, observing how much stress William put on flawlessness and control. Every utterance reminded him that the clan had been schooled to rank image above tranquility. Harry did not attend the gathering. No one cited it directly, yet Edward could sense the void it generated. Everyone understood that a fragment of the family was absent. He could view the anxiety on Charles's countenance. The lack made every comment regarding family solidarity feel like a deliberate untruth, and it churned a deep disquiet in Edward. Then came the instant that would rupture the calmest portion of Edward's control. Charles stated calmly and factually that certain royal connections were beyond mending. Those phrases struck Edward similar to a bodily punch. He could feel the atmosphere around him alter, and something inside him moved. He had been a silent witness, handling inner tempests and private annoyances for years, but this felt distinct. This was a proclamation from the chief of the family, a declaration that some bonds were no longer worth nourishing, no longer worth shielding.
The statement left Edward with an abrupt, pressing necessity to reply, and that was the instant Edward did something that left the entire clan in stupor. Stay tuned, because the tale is about to get intense. Edward spoke regarding emotional truth, regarding the necessity to acknowledge sensations rather than interring them in the chase for flawlessness. He critiqued the family's fixation with facades and reminded them that it often came at the cost of authentic bonding. For the initial time, Edward openly defied the family, confronting the strict framework and the emotional chill that had long ruled their exchanges. People who observed the session noted that Charles's eyes grew wide. William altered his stance, and Camilla looked away momentarily, unsure how to reply to the violation of etiquette. The eruption did not cease there. Edward spoke of the emotional price of existing behind the ramparts of the palace, of acting flawless while feeling profoundly unwell. He spoke of instances when he had watched the family splinter silently, when he had wished for heat and bonding that seemed forever just out of grasp. When he concluded, Edward could see the astonishment on the visages of those surrounding him. Even Charles, who usually dominated the space effortlessly, appeared caught unawares. William, who prided himself on regulation, could only gaze. Camilla was lost in the instant, but she did her utmost to look elsewhere. Edward realized that he had not meant to startle them so profoundly, but the reality he told them could not stay interred any longer. Overpowered by their responses, he exited the chamber. He roamed at first around the hallways. He didn't even note the staff moving silently in and out of their tasks. His mind was full of the strain, the defiance, the burden of speaking verity in a place where verity was often muffled. He felt both freed and petrified. Speaking had left his heart lighter, but it had also revealed a crack that he could not yet mend. In the midst of wandering, Edward would soon discover something that altered the narrative. Stay with us to find out what he located. Edward stood by the entrance of a hushed room and noticed a missive lying on a table. It appeared recognizable. The stationery was dense, the script exact and intentional, clearly the Queen's. He had viewed her notes before, usually official and stately, but this one looked a bit distinct. It was deeply intimate, directed not to a function, but to a human. As he read, he sensed her spirit. The missive spoke of the significance of shielding the soul of the family, of recognizing that solidarity was not just about facades or public reputation, but about emotional bonding, about viewing each other entirely, even when it was arduous. She reminded him that power was not only gauged in poise or flawlessness, but in comprehension, empathy, and the bravery to speak and act with truth. Reading the terms, Edward felt comforted that the Queen had relied on him to bear something essential within the clan. Her message reminded him that the duty of keeping the family emotionally whole was now partially his. That the quiet, sensitive, observant self he had nurtured was not a frailty, but a requirement. She admitted the complications, the cracks, and the gap that had developed among his siblings, and she urged him to be a span, a spirit that could nourish where others had become stiff. The note made Edward halt for a second. He realized that his challenge to the family, the words he had risked saying aloud, were only the start. He understood that guarding the heart of the family was not a singular act, but a perpetual, patient endeavor that required toughness, bravery, and perception. The responsibility would not be effortless, and the chore was intricate. Yet the Queen's letter gave him a silent but undeniable path. The session and the aftermath had exposed cracks, tensions, and voids in the family that could no longer be disregarded. His own voice had broken the long-held quiet, and the Queen's words reminded him why that voice mattered. He slid the letter into his jacket, and that was the instant he resolved to confess. His admission will shake the country as never before. Keep watching as we disclose the stunning specifics of Andrew's confession. Prince Andrew's shocking admission came in a recent film celebrating Queen Elizabeth's life and times, where Prince Andrew dropped a bombshell that rocked the British populace. Edward walked into the atelier composed on the date of the interview. He seemed assured, yet, Sophie noted, he wasn't tranquil. She reached for his palm in comfort. He bowed his head faintly, thankful, but the stress adhered to him like a second dermis. The cameras turned, lights blinked, and the team quietly readied the entire arrangement. Was intended to honor the Queen's heritage, yet Edward schemed to speak not only about recollections of her triumphs. The chat commenced lightly, with recognizable queries about the Queen's feats. Edward replied cautiously, courteous in phrase. His voice was steady, however he was seemingly tight to anyone paying heed. Then came a basic query about her personally, about her existence behind the public view. He hesitated, took a respiration, and his look moved slightly, as if remembering something. Then Edward released the revelation. Edward spoke of a private chat he had shared with the Queen near the conclusion of her life. He depicted the instant as close and unshielded, one of those scarce occurrences when a ruler let her kin see through her dreads, her expectation, and her desires. She had requested him to carry something onward, to guarantee that the emotional link between her offspring, her grandchildren, and the family as a whole remained whole. She had assigned him with watching the family's soul, not just its picture, a duty that would necessitate watchfulness, endurance, and bravery. But that was not all that occurred.
As Edward recounted the Queen's words, the feeling that had been held in check for decades finally emerged. He confessed to sensing that he had flopped in that pledge. Water pooled at the edges of his vision, uninvited and uncheckable, tracking routes down his cheeks. He spoke of the cracks within the clan, the strains of obligation, and the injuries that went unsaid. Edward admitted to a profound sorrow, a yearning for the heat and link that had once characterized his kin. He remembered instances from youth, the silent evenings with the Queen, where she would share tales or sagacity. He recalled watching his siblings mature under public examination, seeing them go through victory and letdown, while he stayed in the rear, observing, backing, feeling both respect and seclusion. He clarified that the family had often splintered under the heft of duty and anticipation. Edward's voice was wavering at times. You could feel the grief of decades spent observing relationships stretch under unseen pressures. He thought of instances when mirth might have eased loads, when chats could have spanned distance, when truth could have aided, but none of these ever appeared. Edward's words moved from musing to disclosure. He revealed that perhaps the monarchy had leaned too heavily on flawlessness and gloss, that it might be time to hug humanity instead. The populace often anticipated perfect shows, unreachable poise, and perpetual nobility. But Edward's admission proposed that there was bravery in fragility, worth in truth, and might in admitting defect. Through tears, Edward spoke of a dream for the hereafter, not grand in ritual, but close in aim. He desired the monarchy to be a zone where relationships mattered more than visuals, where voices could be heard without critique, and where emotional truth could exist alongside custom. He admitted that he had not yet triumphed wholly, but his admission itself was a stride, a span toward mending, comprehension, and the slow recovery of family heat. As the cameras caught his admission, Edward allowed himself a second to respire, to feel the heft of decades lift just slightly. Sophie compressed his hand tenderly. The studio remained hushed around him. His words echoed and reached far beyond the partitions, touching viewers who had never imagined seeing a royal in such unshielded form. The interview ended, but Edward's admission remained. It was a pivot point, not only for him, but for the view of the monarchy itself. The country had seen a prince divested of artifice, wrestling openly with sorrow, desire, and expectation. He had demonstrated that fragility was not frailty, that defect could coexist with obligation, and that humanity mattered as much as custom. For Edward, it was the start of a fresh chapter, a moment of judgment and lucidity that would mold his route onward and perhaps, in time, influence the family he had vowed to shield. In that quiet after the cameras ceased turning, Edward felt a subtle displacement. The admission had not solved all the cracks, nor mended all the ancient injuries, but it had opened a zone for verity, for discourse, for link. He knew the trek was far from finished, that the family's tempest still rages quietly behind palace doors, yet for the initial time and decades he had spoken, and the heft on his mind had commenced to lift. Thank you for remaining with us. Do you reckon Edward was correct to defy King Charles? Distribute your views with us in the remark area. If you relished the video, like, distribute, and subscribe to our station. Also, click the following video on your screen, and you will take pleasure.